Welcome to the Spanish OA meeting, Hay una solución, which means there's a solution. Our group has been around for almost 2 years, and we are open in Zoom 24/7 every day of the year. We have around 70 meetings a week, including special meetings such ones for anorexia and bulimia and compulsive eating from children as young as 8 years old with their parents. We focus our recovery by working the steps and living on steps 10, 11, and 12 as a way of life. Today is July 23rd. My name is Lupita and I am your moderator. We have simultaneous interpretation into Spanish provided by Monica M. and Mario G. If you want to listen to the Spanish interpretation, please click on the little world icon in the bottom of the screen and select Spanish. This channel is dedicated only to English. Si quieres escuchar esto en español, por favor, ve a la parte de abajo de tu pantalla y busca el icono con el símbolo de mundo, apriétalo y selecciona español. Este canal será dedicado solamente para inglés. This meeting is being recorded, but only the audio will be published. Our speaker this morning is Harlan, who has many years in OA and has a great message of recovery to share with us. This summer refresher of the 12-step program. Harlan is a recovered compulsive eater for Scottsdale, Arizona, and he has been in OA since 1979. Over 30 years, he has been shared his experience, strength, and hope to thousands of compulsive overeaters. During these 3 days workshop, he will be presenting us with the 12 steps of recovery as presented in the 12 in the big book of AA. The opinions expressed here are those of the people who express them, and they do not represent OA as a whole. The 12-step program does not have celebrities nor representatives, but we do have people with a great recovery who has a lot of experience and knowledge of our program, who would help us a lot. Harlan is one of these people. There will be a period of questions at the end of the talk. For the questions in Spanish, please write them in the chat. We will translate them to you. For questions in English, and for questions in English, raise your hand with the electronic hand that is in Zoom. And now, with my pleasure, I introduce Harlan.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy to be here. What an honor it is to be with you tonight. It is just an absolute honor to be here. I am Harlan G, and I am a recovered but not cured compulsive overeater. And as was just said, I do live in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I have been a compulsive overeater from the moment I was born. I have very vivid memories of being a young child, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And I remember very vividly people like doctors or neighbors or friends of my parents or, whomever, people screaming at my mother and father about how fat I was getting and how much I was eating and why didn't they do more to control how much I was eating. And I felt a lot of shame. I felt a lot of frustration. I felt a lot of pain because of my overweight condition for as far back as I can possibly remember. For as far back as I can possibly remember, this disease had me in its grip and it did not let me go. It was just something that I ate constantly, even as a little boy, little child. I have memories of these things, of eating binges. And I remember, particularly when I was like, I would say probably 4 years old, 5 years old at the time. I remember taking a step stool and going up the step stool to get to cookies and then falling off the table. Once I had the cookies, I forgot that I had used the step stool and I walked backwards and I fell down. I remember my mom and dad coming in and you know, they were so alarmed at how hurt I was. And I just kept eating these cookies. Whoa, somebody's definitely unmuted here. Somebody's definitely unmuted. Oh, are we interpreting? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Do you need to interpret? Okay.
No,
Just
no,
gonna-
no. They are doing it automatically.
Okay. I'm just
So
gonna
don't
keep
worry.
going. I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
you just keep on going. Yeah.
Okay. I remember when I was about 6 years old, I was tired of getting screamed at. I was tired of getting chastised, yelled at by adults, and kids were making fun of me by then too. But the people would say to me, you know, don't eat so much, you're going to feel better. You know, fat boys don't get girlfriends. I found that to be true. Fat boys don't get good jobs. I found that to be true. Fat boys don't get to play on the baseball team. Fat boys don't get to do this. Fat boys don't get to do that. And you see, what people did not understand at all is that I wanted more than anything to acquiesce to their demands. I wanted to be the thin boy, the smart boy that didn't eat Oreo cookies like they wanted me to be. They thought that I was making some kind of dumb decision that caused me to be fat. They thought I was just lazy, that I lacked willpower, that I lacked discipline, that I didn't care about life, that I didn't care about myself, that I didn't care about my mom, I didn't care about my dad. And nothing could have been further from the truth. I cared about all those things, but what they didn't understand and what I could not make them understand is that I could not live in my skin unless I was eating. Food, without me knowing it, became my solution to the problem. And we're going to be talking about that later on. And when I was 6 years old, I remember very distinctly trying to use willpower, trying to use discipline not to eat so much. And when it didn't really work, I just felt very hopeless. I felt very suicidal. I felt like, what's the use? And I was really a little kid. I was 7 years old. I felt like, what is the use anyway? And I knew inherently when I was 6 and 7 years old, 8 years old, I knew I couldn't live with the food and I couldn't live without the food. My mom was a compulsive overeater. My dad was a compulsive overeater. My mom was mentally ill. My mom had 3 distinct personalities. She could be a 3-year-old, she could be a screaming, raving lunatic, or she could be a pretty together person. And my mom and dad fought constantly. Now, is that why I needed food? Is that why I became a compulsive overeater? No, we're going to find out that that is not why. We're going to find out that this is more a product of nature than it is nurture. You can sometimes have twins. You can have brothers and sisters. You can have people raised in the same house. One becomes a compulsive overeater and one does not. It's not a question of what did my mom do or what did my dad do or what they didn't do. I'm just letting you know this so you get a little bit better picture of my background. My father was 54 years old when I was born, so that by the time I was in kindergarten, he was a 60-year-old man. He was not one generation in front of me, he was two. I don't have grandparents, I don't have aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, and sisters. I don't have any of that stuff. My father's family was wiped out in Europe around the turn of the 20th century. Not World War II Jewish prejudice, World War I Jewish prejudice in Russia, when Russia became and Poland became graveyards for Jews. And my father's family was obliterated off the face of the earth. He was the sole survivor of a family of around 40 people. And he came to this country when he was 14 years old. He was very, very marked by PTSD. He was very marked by the prejudice that he had seen, the murder and the mayhem that he had seen firsthand. And he was 14 years old and he came to this country to make a new life. And he did the best he could. And my mother and father loved me very much. But the problem was my weight was really creeping into their lives in a very negative way. And the only time they would stop fighting with one another, they fought constantly. They fought from the moment they got up till the moment they finally went to sleep. They never said a nice word to each other. But the one time when they would stop fighting was when they would express concern about how fat I was getting and how much food I was eating. And they were really, really concerned. Quite a bit of time was spent of them for them to discuss what are we going to do and what are we going to do. And of course, there was nothing they could do. And I get asked this question all the time, what can we do for the child? What can we do for the little boy or the little girl who's compulsively overeating? Why am I looking at somebody playing cards? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. So the bottom line is that we have a situation where it is a very, very, very sad disease, not only for the sufferer, but it is a sad disease for the people around us. And that is something that this disease affects everyone around us. And I always felt very different because of my eating disorder. I didn't know I had an eating disorder. I was convinced that what everybody told me was exactly right, that I lacked willpower, that I was stupid, that I lacked discipline. I just believed what they told me. And when I was 9 years old, I was put by a doctor on diet pills, prescription amphetamine, and I was given these diet pills, and boy, these pills worked. But when you crashed down from them, I would eat Illinois and most of Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Chicago, by the way. If I hadn't told you that already, I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm very proud of that fact because I'm a proud Chicagoan. 9 years old, I'm sleeping about 15, 20 minutes a month. These pills are pretty powerful. Oh my God, are they powerful? I can still remember the pounding in my head. Oh my God, like Veasmer, they would just pound in my head. And I get accused of this now. I couldn't stop saying like the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And I couldn't stop my brain from doing that. And like when people would talk to me, it was one of the reasons I used little Charlie Brown's picture behind me. It would sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. When Charlie Brown's teacher would talk, all you'd hear is wah, 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 wah. And that's all I would hear when people were talking to me because my head was so full of this amphetamine and I'm 9 years old. And then but I lost weight. Oh, did I lose weight? Boy, that stuff works. The only problem is when I got to be about 10, Marilyn Monroe in Hollywood died from these very same pills. And some of the information started coming out of Los Angeles about the dangers of these diet pills. So what they did was they switched me from one pill to another pill. Very, very same results. The name of the pill was different. Instead of it being pink, it was now blue with exactly the same results. But it didn't at all treat the problem. The problem was I had an eating disorder. I was 10 years old. I was getting fatter by the day. I was starting to get an overhanging stomach. I was in probably a 36-inch waist by this time in my life, 38-inch waist by this time in my life. And I started to really feel the effect of the disease. And as I grew into puberty, all these feelings that I had, all of these desires for girls and wanting to be with them and wanting to date and wanting to hold a girl's hand or do the things that boys do with girls, I couldn't do them. I was the fattest kid around. Who was going to go out with me? And I was never invited to the makeout parties. I was never invited to the dances. And so I was never invited. I had no one to go with. I had no way to bridge that gap into that world. And it became extremely painful for me. And what no one told me, thank God, or I probably would have taken my own life. What no one told me, no one could have known, was that I was not to go out with a girl until I was 35 years of age. And I still pay a very hefty price for all the food that I ate when it comes to dating, when it comes to intimacy, and I was physically emasculated. I had so much fat on my groin and so much fat on my legs and my stomach. And I had an overhanging stomach by the time I was a teenager. And I had so much pain from this disease. I was physically and emotionally deformed and emasculated by this disease. And I was feeling the effects of this disease. I was getting beaten down. Every dream I dared to dream, I knew would go up in smoke. And I became very defeated. I became a very defeated human being. I became a whipped human being. And I didn't even dare to dream. And in my mind, I would say to myself, what's the use of dreaming about going to college? What's the use of dreaming about getting married? What's the use of dreaming about having a family? All that's going to happen is I'm just going to eat myself into oblivion, and all those dreams are going to go up in smoke. And so I never really approached life with the zeal that my friends could approach life. Like, we're going to get this done and we're going to do this. And that girl over there, she is going to go out with me. Or I couldn't enjoy even the dream, because I knew that I could not trust myself. And that's something that is a very serious thing about this disease. It destroys not only the body, it destroys the spirit. And I wanted to die by the time I was 14, 15 years old, 12 years old. I wanted to die a lot more than I wanted to live. I just wanted the pain to be over with. And what I begged God for as a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, I begged him, let me know when you're going to kill me, so I can get some Twinkies, I can get some Oreo cookies, and I can die with a full stomach. But I knew inherently, without ever seeing a copy of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, by the time I was 12, 13 years old, I knew I couldn't live with the food, and I knew I could not live without the food. I was trapped in a situation that I did not understand, I could not control, and I was whipped. I was down for the count. And there was a lot more of me that wanted to die than there was that wanted to live. And this disease is a very debilitating disease, and it sucks the life out of you before it kills you. It did with me. And how I didn't die and how I didn't kill myself, not either with food or with anything. I think if I could have, I would have done it a different way. But I just figured I'm just going to eat myself to death. I'm not a violent person. I'm not a person, for extreme measures. I just figure, well, as long as everybody's telling me I'm never going to have a girlfriend, as long as everybody's telling me I'm never going to be successful, I might as well just eat and eat and eat and hope that they're right, that someday I'll just have a heart attack and die. And that's what I really wanted more than anything. I wanted the world to leave me alone, and I just wanted to be alone with my Twinkies. I wanted to be alone with my Oreo cookies and my ice cream, and just let me die. I saw no purpose to life. And when I got to be in a situation where I was a teenager, like I said, 13, 14, not only was I excluded from dating, I was excluded from holding a girl's hand. You know, I had crushes on girls, but they sure didn't react to me the way they would react to my friends. But something else was also going on as well. And that was my mother and father started to decline dramatically. My mother not only was mentally ill, my mother was very physically ill as well. And when I started to get to be about 14 and 15 years old, although I was not prepared for this, and I knew that my dad really couldn't get very involved. My dad, he spoke English, but only when he had to. It was not easy for him to speak English. He didn't have the confidence in himself when he was speaking or trying to understand English. I remember one time a teacher telling me a story about how my dad, he came to school on parents' night because my mom was in the hospital. This is when I was like in third, fourth grade, something like that. And he didn't really understand what the teacher was saying. He really couldn't get what they were saying. And the teacher laughed about this, and she told me the story. She said, he came up to me at the end of teacher's night, and he held up his fist. Now, my dad was a big Russian guy, big Russian bear, they used to call him. He was, for his generation of a Jewish man, he was about 6 feet tall, but he was a big guy. And he held up his fist and he says, does he behave? And he said to the teacher, if he don't behave, not if he doesn't behave, if he don't behave, he gets this and he knows it. And that's all he said to the teacher. And the teacher was cracking up. It was Mrs. Lamette in 5th grade. And she was just cracking up from him. She thought he was a character extraordinaire. But I knew inherently that I had really nobody to turn to. And my mother was dying. My mother was a serious diabetic. My mother was not only diabetic, but my mother was a compulsive overeater, and my mother was a sneak eater. And so what would happen is all day long, while everyone was around, she would never eat. My mother, you would never, ever see her indulge in food. When you lived with her like I did, you would think that she existed on one hard-boiled egg a day, plus a half of an English muffin, little coffee, and maybe some water throughout the day. But then at night, when I would go to sleep and my dad would be asleep, holy mackerel, she would eat the house. And she would eat blueberry pie and apple pie. She would go to town on anything and everything she could get her hands on. And so her diabetes was completely out of control. And my life was out of control because while I was supposed to be worried about the math test, or I was supposed to be worried about, does Susie like me, or does Mary like me, or do I like Mary, or whatever, I was worried about where's the blood test. I was worried about, what's going on with this doctor, what's going on with that doctor. And you know what? I wasn't really prepared for this. I was too young. I was a kid. I was supposed to be a kid, and I couldn't really be a kid. I was worried about their dying, and my dad was dying, and my mother got very, very sick. And my mother, at the end of her life, was an amputee from diabetes. She had her leg taken because she became gangrenous. She got gangrene in one of her legs. It was just not a good situation at all. And my dad was not only a compulsive overeater, he was a smoker. One after the other, after the other, after the other. Light one with the one you're smoking kind of smoker. Chesterfield king size. I can see them now. And when he died, there was bags of these coupons that he had that they gave out with the cartons of Chesterfield. We never cashed them in or anything. We just had them. but nothing ever happened with him. But he got cancer, and he went from emphysema to cancer pretty quickly. He went from emphysema to cancer, and then he went from cancer of the lungs. It metastasized, and it started to affect his esophagus and things like that. So it was not a very pretty picture. In the meantime, by the time I was a senior in high school, I was 335 pounds. And I remember very distinctly, I was a junior in high school, and I broke my ankle in gym class. I went to Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, which is not there anymore. My mother took me there, and I had a broken ankle, and the doctor's name was Max Bernstein. And Max Bernstein had these little glasses. You know, he had these little glasses. I graduated high school, Mather High School in Chicago in 1972. So this would be 71. It would be 1971. And he had these little granny glasses, which were quite popular at that time. And he looked over the granny glasses as he was casting my ankle. Now the doctors don't cast your ankle anymore. The nurses or whoever does it. But anyway, he looked over at my mother and he said, Virginia, my mother's name was Virginia. Virginia, he isn't going to live to see 30 years old. And he pointed at me while he was yelling at my mother. And he said, Virginia, he isn't going to live to see 30 years old. He is 17 years old. And he is over 300 pounds. What in the hell is going on at your house? I remember him telling my mother this, like I could think it was yesterday or it was like an hour ago. I can see it. I can smell it. I remember the cast was starting to get hot. I remember very well the whole incident. I remember like it was 5 minutes ago, and my mother was crying. What do you think me and my mother did on the way home? We went for ice cream. So we were two compulsive overeaters that were highly emotional. And of course, I'm going to go on my diet tomorrow and so on and so forth. Of course, that never happened. And by the time I was a sophomore in college, I went to Roosevelt University in downtown Chicago. I was over 500 pounds, and I'm eating constantly at this point, and they're dying. They're dying. My mother died when I was 22 years old, and my father died when I was 24 years old. My father and mother died after long, destructive illnesses. They didn't go all of a sudden. It took years for them to go. It took a long time. And it destroyed me because I was totally alone at this point. Now I don't have relatives, but I have wonderful, wonderful friends. I talk to people every day of my life that were around in those days when my mother and father were alive. My mother and father loved them, and they loved my parents and so on. So I'm very, very lucky in that I do have friends that have followed me all throughout my life. I talk to people all the time that I've known for 60, 67, 50, years. And I'm very, very blessed in that area. But at the time that they were dying, my life was completely out of control. I was writing bad checks to anybody stupid enough to take them. My finances were a disaster. I was spending money on food that I did not have. My food habit, not my heroin habit, not my hooker habit, not my cocaine habit, my food habit in the 1970s was about $100 to $150 a day, come hell or high water. I was eating constantly. I was eating everything and anything that was not nailed down. I was not wearing underpants. I had towels in the late 70s, early 80s. I had towels shoved between layers of flab to keep the skin from rubbing together to avoid the contact dermatitis. I smelled like a zoo. I was filthy dirty. I did not practice hygiene. I did not brush my teeth. I did not brush my hair. I did not wear clean clothes. I owned a couple of garments that sort of, kind of, almost fit. I owned no garments that fit. My home should have been disaster area number one. It should have been a super fun site. It was filthy dirty. I had mice and cockroaches running around the apartment. It was absolutely ridiculous. I had my car repossessed twice. I mean, life was just beyond insane in my life. And I was ill-equipped to handle being alone. I was ill-equipped for any of this. And as I say, when I was 22, my mom died. When I was 24, my dad died. And I really was spinning out of control. I really didn't know which end was up. I didn't know which way was north and which way was south. And I just wanted to die. I just wanted to go and die. Now, you can believe in God or not believe in God. That's, of course, your choice. But I'm just going to share something with you that I believe to be a God thing. My mother died, and the last conversation I had with her when she was coherent was she'd say to me, "You're going to be alone very soon." And she'd say, "You have nobody." And she said to me, "You have to find a way not to eat so much. You have to find a way to survive in this world without the excess food." And when my father was dying, the last conversation that he had with me was the same exact sentiment, the same exact sentiment. He spoke to me in Yiddish at the end of his life. This is the night before he passed. And he said to me, "My zon," which means my son, "you're going to have to find a way not to eat so much." The fressen is a merdele chazach afendu. What that means in Yiddish is the eating, the excess. To eat is essen. To eat excessively is fressen. So he never used essen with me. He would use fressen. That's the overeating. That's the overindulging. And he would say to me, it's like a merdele chazach. What does that mean? A merdele chazach means it's a murderous thing. Afendu means for you. It's a murderous thing, afendu. He'd say, "You've got to," in Yiddish, he would say, "You've got to find a way not to eat so much or you're not going to have any kind of life. You're just not going to have any kind of life." Now, you believe what you want. I'm going to believe what I want. But in November of 1978, my father went to God. And I know for a fact that my father must have had great sway with God Almighty. And I know that my father's in heaven. I believe my mother is too, but I know for a fact my father's in heaven. And the reason that I know this to be true is he lived hell on earth. He had tremendous PTSD, the hatred that he saw in his life, the pure, unadulterated prejudice, anti-Semitism, and hatred of our people by those who were around us for nothing, and for what reason? For what reason? He saw this, and it affected him every day of his life. He would walk the apartment that we lived in, particularly when it came close to certain dates, certain things, and he would be having a nightmare. He knew he was up. I mean, it wasn't like he was sleepwalking, and he'd be crying. If you've never seen your father cry, I've seen my father cry on 1,000 different occasions. And he'd be screaming and crying about his mother, and he witnessed their murders, and he witnessed he witnessed people killing a 6-week-old baby. He witnessed people killing his nieces and nephews that were toddlers at the time. He heard the sounds of the bullets piercing the flesh of his brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, parents, cousins. This is stuff that did not leave him. And so I was marked by this as well. He wasn't the only one that was affected by this. I'm being affected because I'm listening to him recounting these stories. And where I'm going with this is he had great sway with the Lord, I'm sure, because he lived hell on earth. Now, he died November 11th, 1978. On February the 2nd, 1979, just a matter of a couple of months after my father passed away, he must have gotten his audience with God Almighty. And they sat down and they talked. And my father must have asked him for the one thing he wanted more than anything, and that is for somebody somehow to save me. And there were two friends, two people, two wonderful people on the evening of February 2nd, 1979, that came into my filthy, dirty, unpaid for apartment where the rent was 2-3 months in arrears. And they pushed their way past the pizza boxes, and they pushed their way past the Milk Dud boxes and the wrappers of candy and the Twinkie wrappers and the pizza boxes. They pushed their way past the filth and the smell. And what they did was they made me come to a meeting of Overeaters Anonymous in Skokie, Illinois, at the Orchard Mental Health Center on Niles Center Road in Grosse Pointe. And I went to the meeting and I saw people, and I didn't want to be there. I looked at my shoes the entire night. I didn't really hear what was going on. I didn't see what was going on, but something came across my brain. And what came across my brain is that there were other people who suffered. But I looked around in judgment of these people, and I looked around and I saw that they were wealthy, that they were thin, that they were beautiful, that they were married, that they had had sex, that they had been married, that they had dated. And I thought to myself, I understand that I'm sick with food and that I have an eating disorder, but what the heck are you people doing here? And as the time went on, and my friends pressured me to continue going because I owed them a lot of money. And so they pressured me to continue going throughout 79, 80, 81, part of 82 before I graduated. And I went, and my graduation ceremony was beautiful. They said, "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order, please?" And that was my graduation ceremony. I met Fred Schneider, who started the HOW program. He was a teacher in New York who came to Chicago quite frequently. I met Bill Bluestein. I went to one of Bill's retreats, and I met a lot of people. I was 24 years old when I came to my first OA meeting. I was 500-600 pounds at that time. That wasn't as heavy as I was going to get. I gained a lot of weight during the middle 80s and went over 700 pounds. I had no life at all whatsoever. And I actually hated the meetings. I would eat my way to the meetings in bold defiance, and I would pray for a Russian airstrike during the meetings, and I would eat my way home. And I would come home from the meetings and I would say, "Fear, false evidence appearing real. That's pretty cool." And then I would go eat a pizza. Or I would come home, I'd say, "Wow, that's amazing. If you keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you're getting. What a profound thing, how true that is." And then I would go eat a gallon or two of ice cream. So I was hearing what was going on, sort of, kind of, almost, sort of, but I wasn't really living it. I wasn't really submitting to it because I still wanted to die. And then, as I said, I went away and I graduated, and then I came back. And this time, God kind of whispered on that one ember of my heart that was still green. It was still not black from wanting to die. It hadn't burned out. When an ember is burned out, it turns like charcoal, black charcoal, because it's already burned out. This one wasn't burned. And he whispered on that last ember of the heart that had not submitted to the suicidal thoughts. And I started to hear things, and I started to see things that I hadn't heard. I had one more relapse in me, but for a long time, I embraced this program. I embraced it as I had never embraced anything. And I had about a 7-year period or 7-year period of gorgeous recovery until I stopped doing the work. But what happened then was I started to see some things that I had never seen before. You guys came in and snuck some things in my big book that I had never noticed before. And I started losing weight because I was abstinent, and people were holding my feet to the fire, and I had wonderful sponsorship. People came into my life that I didn't deserve, that I didn't even know how they found me, but they found me. And it was a miracle, and it was wonderful. And the very first thing that I noticed was on page 58. And it says, if you want what we have and you're willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. Now, I had to take that apart with a very loud, very wonderful, he should rest in peace, very wonderful man. And his name was Tom, and he was just wonderful. And he said to me in a Greek restaurant in Chicago on a Saturday afternoon, he would poke his big finger in my chest and he would say, "Are you out of ideas yet, kid? Are you out of ideas yet, kid?" I was 20, 30 years younger than anybody in that room. And so he would call me kid, and he would push his finger in my chest and he'd say, "Are you out of ideas yet, kid?" And I'd say yes. And he'd say, "Okay, we'll see." And he said, "If you want what we have, what is it that we have?" Now, my first answer was unacceptable. I said, my first answer is, you have people that are not eating compulsively. And he explained to me that at Dunkin' Donuts, there are people that can eat 3/4 of a donut, leave 1/4 of the donut, and not eat any more donuts that day or that week. They're not eating compulsively either. And he explained to me that what it is that we have are compulsive overeaters who are not eating compulsively, and they're happy in their release. There is a world of difference between dieting with group support, where I'm going to go home and be stark, raving abstinent. I'm going to hang from the chandeliers. It is now 5:42 in Arizona, and I'm going to hang from the chandeliers, and I'm going to count every second, every minute until I can get to my breakfast tomorrow. That's not freedom. That's not freedom. That's not recovery. That's dieting with group support. That's stark, raving abstinent. I learned that expression from him. Stark, raving abstinent. And what we're going to do this weekend, tonight, tomorrow, Sunday, is we're going to learn the vast difference between dieting with group support, which is what you see a lot of people doing in here, and real freedom, real recovery. He says, if you want what we have, and what we have, hopefully, I hope there's 143 of us here. I hope I'm not the only one. Well, Charles is here, so I know he's in recovery, but I'm not. I get that there are also people in recovery too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we're the only ones, but we're not just dieting with group support, just stark raving abstinent. Compulsive overeaters who are not eating compulsively, and because of a loving God, and because of the 12 steps of Overeaters Anonymous found in the book called Alcoholics Anonymous, we are free to live our lives and not obsess like that and not live that way. And so there's a vast difference between dieting with group support and recovery. If you want what we have and you're willing to go to any length to get it, he'd say, what are you willing to do? And when are you willing to do it? Then you're ready to take certain steps. And I noticed something else too. It says on page 45 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the thesis line of this book is, the main object of this book is to help you find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Now, if the main object of this book is to help you find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem, then that better be the main object of my life. Because there is no greater calling than to fulfill what it says in this book for me. It says on page 77 of the big book of AA, our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. Can I be of maximum service to God and the people about me if I'm still eating? And of course, the answer is no. No. And how do I tie all of this together? I tie it together by understanding that the real purpose of my life is to work these steps, which will put me into a situation of a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And by having a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I will be able to capitalize on the loneliness, the degradation, the fear, the shame, the guilt of the disease to help the next sick, compulsive overeater. And that my greatest calling in life is not to make a ton of money, which I didn't do, but I make enough. My bills are paid. I'm okay. I have good credit. My greatest calling in life is not to be the first baseman for the Cubs, although that would have been nice. It's not to do any of those things. The greatest calling that I have in life is to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. And that means I need to be in recovery. And how do I be in recovery? How do I get in recovery? How do I stay in recovery? Well, we're going to talk about the doctor's opinion here very soon. I put the food down and I work the steps every day as if my life depended on it, and as if my hair was on fire. And when I say as if my hair was on fire, to save you from asking me at the Q&A, that means this is the number one thing in my life without exception. There is nothing in my life more important now than the working of 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. And by working 10, 11, and 12, I'm working 4 through 12 every day for the rest of my life. And I work 1 by not eating pecan pie. And I work 1 by staying on my food plan. And I work 2 every day because I pray every day. I may not pray the same prayers as you. That's okay. I believe in a deity that you may not believe in. I believe in a deity that is what I believe in, but you don't have to believe in any of that. All you have to believe or be willing to believe is that there is a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. It doesn't have to be the God of the Catholics, the Protestants, the Jews, the Muslims. It doesn't have to be any particular religious God. It is something that you formulate, that you believe in, whether you are an atheist or an agnostic. What is an atheist? Someone who does not believe that there is a God. An agnostic, ag means without, gnostic means knowledge. You're not sure one way or the other. And we're going to be talking about this tomorrow, not today. We're going to be talking about pockets of agnosticism. And what is a pocket of agnosticism? I may believe that God let the Cubs win the World Series in 2016, and God brought Michael Jordan to Chicago, which was very nice of him. But I may believe that God doesn't care about my food. That's a pocket of agnosticism. That's a pocket of I'm not sure one way or the other. Or God may not care about my finances, or God may not care about my whatever. That's a pocket of agnosticism that we're going to be talking about. And that is where a lot of people get tripped up. Came to believe indicates that it's a process, and I have to work at it every day. I have doubt just like anybody else. I have fear. I have anger. I have jealousy. I have all these various emotions and character defects, just like any of you. But we have steps for that. No matter how evolved my recovery gets, I will never rise above the level of a human being. Now, before we go to the doctor's opinion, let's consider there's something else that tells me some things that I need to know. What is it that I need to know? It's on page XX in the foreword to the 2nd edition of the Big Book of AA. What does it say on page XX X, it says of 100 people that came into AA, 50% of them worked the program and got sober at once. Of the remaining 50, 25 got sober, and the other 25 showed improvement. That's a 75% recovery rate. We can't talk about 75%. We can't talk about 25%. We can't talk about 5%. We are doing well when we can look around us in OA and see maybe a 1.5% to 2% recovery. Now, granted, I will be defending this till the day I die. There is no more insidious addiction than food. I understand that alcoholism and drug addiction and Al-Anon and love addiction and love avoidance and gambling and all these things are very serious with horrible, horrible consequences. I am not blind to that. But I think food is the most insidious addiction there is, because in no other addiction do you still imbibe in a substance close to what you did. And as time goes on, you have more accountability in OA. What do I mean by that? You have to work your program harder and harder, which they should do, but they take food away from you. Let me tell you something. I'm 67 years old. If I went back to eating the way I did when I was 60, if I went back to eating by the way I did at 55, even in abstinence, which was abstinent at that time, I would be dead within 2 years. So there is an accountability. This Wednesday, the 28th, I go to the cardiologist and I go to the nutritionist. And let me tell you something. I fear it. I don't fear the cardiologist. I fear the nutritionist. Why do I fear it? Because I know that if she doesn't do it now, she'll do it in January. She's going to take food away from me. She's going to take food away from me. They don't encounter this in any other program. It can be very difficult. And the other thing about food is very different. They don't drink, so it's very, very kind of different. Foods that are okay now may not be okay in 6 months. Things change, things kind of get funky and they change. And sometimes I have to look at something that has worked for me for a very long time, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. And I have to get honest about it. So if we work our program and we work our steps, maybe we can get back to some higher numbers. Let it start with us. Let it start with me. If it's going to be, let it start with me. I also think that each and every one of you has your own path, and that's, that's something that's between you and God, but we can do a better job than what we're doing in a lot of areas. Okay, enough about me. And I know you're going to be hearing some things about me during the weekend, because I will tie some of my life experiences. But in conclusion, here is what I want to tell you. I've lost a little over 500 pounds. I have 22 and a half years of very, very solid abstinence. I have done an incredible amount of service for OA. But if I served OA 24 hours a day for the rest of my life, I could never give it what it gave me. It gave me whatever life I have, whatever freedom, whatever happiness I have, whatever joy I have in my life comes from a loving God and a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to thank God every day for the men and women who walked before me, some of whom died in their alcoholism and some of whom died in the food or their gambling. And every one of those people is a part of my story. And every one of those people gave sacrifices so that I could be alive today. And it is not the duration of a life that is so important. It is the donation of a life that is so important. And now I can go to God and know that as much as I could have, I made a difference. And I don't hate myself anymore. That's a big reward. I loathed myself. I hated myself. And I don't hate myself anymore. And I walk the streets a free man. I can go home to Chicago. I can be here in Arizona. I can visit Los Angeles. I can visit anywhere in the world and not fear who I'm going to run into and what lies I told those people, or that I owed them money, or that I tried to manipulate them or put one over on them. I don't live that way anymore. And when I don't live that way, I don't eat that way. And when I don't eat that way, my life works better. Whatever I can tell you today, it's this: if I never see you in life, if I never get a chance to meet you, and I hope that our paths will cross, I will tell you in summation that on page 88 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there are some words, very few of them, that are so impactful that they bear repeating here. And on page 88 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says simply, it works. It really does. If you are on the struggle bus, if you're new and you're doubting whether or not this can work for you, let me assure you, if it worked for me, it can work for anyone. I am as sick, depraved, low bottom, compulsive overeater as there is in the world. And whether you are a restrictor, whether you are anorexic, whether you come from one side of the scale or the other, whether you're an anorexic, whether you're an exercise bulimic, whether you are a laxative bulimic, or whether you are a throwing up regurgitation bulimic, whether you weighed 90 or you weigh whatever you weigh, this way of life works. For thousands of years, people, both afflicted with alcoholism and those around them, looked up through tears in their eyes. They looked up into heaven and said, what are we going to do? Going back as far as Solomon in the Old Testament, Solomon wrote in the book of Solomon that he believed that alcoholism was an illness, but he couldn't prove it, and he had no remedy for it. Notice I didn't use the word cure, I used the word remedy. In England, in the 1640s, in England, there was a doctor, and this doctor's name was Trotter. Dr. Trotter, he believed that alcoholism was an illness, but he couldn't prove it, and he had absolutely no cure for it, no remedy for it. In the United States, while they were still colonies, and then they declared their independence and so on, Dr. Benjamin Rush, who in 1790, when he was the very first Surgeon General of the United States of America, which was brand new at that time, he published a paper in 1790 in which he believed that alcoholism was an illness, but he couldn't prove it, and he had no remedy for it. In the 1920s in New York City, the preeminent hospital for the treatment of alcoholism and drug addiction was the Towns Hospital in New York. It was located at 293 Central Park West, and it was in Manhattan. And it started in 1901. Charles Towns and one other doctor and him, they started it. And in 1929, the stock market crashed on Black Tuesday, October the 29th, 1929. The Great Depression came. And there was a neurologist in New York, and his name was William Duncan Silkworth. And Silky, as he was known, he was a little overinvested in the stock market, and he lost pretty much everything he had when the stock market went to hell in a handbasket. And in November of 1929, he came to work at the Towns Hospital in New York City as that hospital's new medical director. He was friends with Charlie. Charlie wanted him, and he hired him for $35 a week. And Dr. Silkworth, in November of 29, went to work in New York, and he observed thousands of drinkers. And these primarily men, not all men, but primarily men. They would come into the hospital in horrible condition, horrible. And they would fix them up, and they would give them B12, and they would, make them eat and fix their medical needs and blah, blah, blah. And they'd prop these guys up. And 90% of these guys would leave the hospital ne'er to return, never to return. About 10% of these guys, 10%, would come into the hospital, and they would leave, and they would come back, sometimes in a few days, sometimes in a week, sometimes in a month or a year, but they would keep coming in and out and in and out and in and out. And Dr. Silkworth, through nothing more than observation, came to some conclusions and formulated an opinion. What conclusion did he come to? What opinion did he have? Let's find out together. If you're following along, it's on page XXV of the big book in the 4th edition, XXV. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician, he's talking about Silkworth. Bill wrote this first paragraph, but he's talking about Silkworth. Chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. Now, this is a letter, so this is written by Silkworth. Just to be a smartass sometimes, when I go to the cardiologist, I go twice a year. I go January and July, and then I go to the nutritionist January and July. But just to be a smartass, sometimes they'll say, who's your primary care physician? I'll put down William D. Silkworth, Towns Hospital, just to be a schmo. But no, they have my information. Okay. I got to laugh a little bit too. I'm just as human as you are. Okay. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. Now, this is Silkworth writing about Bill Wilson, and tomorrow morning we're going to discuss how Bill came to the Towns Hospital and that he will be in and out of there 3 times. Now, in another book, it says he was in and out of there 4 times, but for the sake of the big book, 3 times is going to be what we're going to talk about. Now, this word hopeless is very good because hopeless means you're out of ideas. You got to be out of ideas. You see, if you still got that idea in your head that as soon as Joe stops drinking, or as soon as your daughter or your son gets married and gets out of the house, or as soon as your kid starts kindergarten, then you're not going to eat so much anymore. We can't really do that much for you. You've got to really exercise your demons. And the hopeless thing is very hopeful, because once you're out of ideas, then we can come in and say, oh, we have an idea, And here it is in print, and let's go through it together. So hopeless is a good thing when it comes to our addiction. Don't discount the value of hopeless. All right. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. What are those ideas? These are ideas that we're going to go into in detail tomorrow morning, but let's suffice to say that he is going to find out through people in something called the Oxford Group of a spiritual remedy to his addiction problem. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow. Let's continue. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, step 12, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. Now, here's that word, the number one question on A Vision for You. If you do not know about A Vision for You, I'm going to ask Clara or one of her people, crew people, please post the information on how to access A Vision for You phone meetings for these folks that may not know about that. But A Vision for You is very popular. But the number one question that we get in A Vision for You, hang on one second, is what's the difference between recovered and recovering? And the difference is recovering means I'm working toward a spiritual awakening. Recovered means I've already had a spiritual awakening, but at no point am I cured. You can be recovered, but not cured. Recovering, but not cured. There's no cure for compulsive overeating, alcoholism, drug addiction. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. So Clara, I don't even know if you're here. I assume you are. If you could take care of that for me, I would be eternally grateful. Thank you. I personally know scores of cases.
I'm here. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. Now I'm going to assume something. There's 152 of us here. I'm going to assume that every other method that you've tried failed, because if it hadn't failed, you wouldn't be here. If I'm not knocking Pay and Way, I'm not knocking psychology, I'm not knocking psychiatry, I'm not knocking hypnosis, I'm not knocking all these things that we try. But if they had worked, you wouldn't be here. Somebody's unmuted. But the bottom line is that it's okay that they failed, because this is going to work. Remember what it says on page 88? It works. It really does. And I'm alive today to prove to you that it does work. I'm alive today so I can show you what recovery looks like. I can show you what happened to me. I can tell you what happened to me, but I'd rather show you and tell you what happened to me. And that's the way to demonstrate these principles. Okay, these facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. And you could put in, if that was written today, tens, hundreds of millions of situations, because there are going to be unborn generations 50,000 years from now that will use this book to recover. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, MD. Now, before we leave this, I want to impress upon you how vitally important Dr. Silkworth is to our program. Without Dr. Silkworth's opinion, there is no program. There is no big book. There's nothing to discuss, because if we don't know what the problem is, then there's nothing to talk about. We would just die. And Dr. Silkworth did not allow Bill Wilson to put his name in there for the first 10 printings of the first edition. Why not? Because he said, these are unproven opinions and they'll run me out of the medical profession. And in 1949, Harry Tiebout, who was Bill's psychiatrist, he published a paper, and in 1949, the American Psychiatric Association and the American Medical Association accepted alcoholism as an illness. And once that occurred, Silkworth told Bill Wilson before the 11th printing, he said, you can put my name in there now. And Silkworth's name started appearing in the 11th printing of the first edition. And he died in 1951, 1 year later, and his name is in there now. But for the first 10 printings, it said blank, blank, MD. He was putting his reputation on the line. He was putting his reputation out there, and he could have been run out of the medical profession because he didn't have proof. Now, Yale University, they've discontinued this, they had an alcoholic studies program for years, and they would prove that Silkworth's opinions, Silkworth's theories were 100% correct. Correct. Just through sheer observation. He was the little doctor who loved drunks. Let's continue. Okay. The physician, I'm at XXVI, 4th edition. The physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe. The word must is going to appear 72 times in the book. And this is what we must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. Stop right there. Never before in the history of Earth has there ever been consideration of a physical component to the disease. Never. It was always weak will, lack of discipline, lack of willpower, apathy, stupidity, insanity. Never was there a physical component to this ever, ever, ever considered. Let's continue. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. New information for planet Earth. There is a physical component. Now he's going to give it a name, and he's going to give it a nomenclature so that we could name it and we could identify it. And as I've told you before, without Silkworth, there is no program. There is no book. There is no program. There's nothing. Now he's not only going to tell us what it is, he's going to name it for us. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Now, when I first saw this word allergy, I did not understand why they were using this word. I have hay fever. I have rose fever. I'm allergic to dust. I'm allergic to mosquito bites. I'm allergic to different things. But when I would eat Milk Duds or I would eat Oreo cookies, I didn't break out in a rash. I didn't sneeze. My nose didn't fill up with mucus. I didn't get itchy, watery eyes. And I went to my local OA meeting at Swedish Covenant Hospital in Chicago, and I asked somebody about this word allergy. And they didn't know how to explain it to me. So I went to a source of information that is incredible, but it's also archaic. Most of you won't even know what I'm talking about. It's something very ancient called a dictionary. Now, many of you don't know what a dictionary is. You're too young. But we who know what a dictionary is, I looked up this word allergy in the dictionary. And when I looked up this word allergy, I found several different meanings for it. And like a lot of words, there was other meanings, but this is the meaning of the word allergy that hit me right in the head. It said, an adverse, abnormal reaction to a food, beverage, or substance. An adverse, abnormal reaction. What does that mean? Adverse means it's harmful. Abnormal means most people do not react that way. An adverse, harmful, abnormal reaction to a food, a beverage, or a substance. And it says it explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Why is it that my friends who had little brothers or sisters or big brothers and sisters, their family was such that they could go and take a hamburger or a salami sandwich and cut it in half and give two kids one half of a hamburger or one half of a sandwich, and neither kid would finish his half. And I would take that same hamburger, I would take that same sandwich and eat 9 more of them. Why is it that when I would go out to eat with friends, of course, this is later in life, not when we were little kids, but why is it that when we would go out to eat, the more food they ate, the less food they wanted? And if they finished their meal, it was rare. They would eat until they were stuffed and push the plate away and signal for the person to take their plate that they were done. Often the person would say, would you like a box to wrap that in? Because they would leave so much food. I was lucky there was glass left on my plate. If I could have, I would have eaten the plate too. Because in my body, the more French fries I eat, the more I want. The more I want, the more I eat. The more I eat, the more I want. The more I want, the more I eat. And it is just endless. And I thought for a long time that it was because they were smarter than me. They were better than me. They came from a rich family. They came from 2 young American parents, and they had all these advantages on me, and that's why they were better people than me. They're not better people than me. They're not stronger than me. They're not smarter than me. I have a disease. And part of my disease is a physical allergy. And this word allergy is an adverse, abnormal reaction to the food, beverage, or substance. And in my body, which is different from their bodies, the more I eat, the more I want. The more I want, the more I eat. And it is endless. And it came to me after years in program, more years than I care to admit, that they have the same relationship with food that my car has with the gas in the tank. That when my gas tank is full, my car doesn't have an urge to drive around the block and go get yet more gas. My car is satisfied with however much gasoline is in the tank at a given time. They are satisfied with their food, and when they're done, they're done. You know, when you're filling up your tank and all of a sudden it goes click and it's done, the tank is full? I didn't have the click. I had no click. I had no click, and the gas would just keep running all over the place, and there'd be gasoline rivers and lakes and streams all over the street because I don't have a click. I don't have a mechanism that says enough. The Yiddish word for enough is genug. Genug in Yiddish means enough. I don't have a click. and apparently neither do you. So this word allergy fit me completely. And now it has a name. Now it has an identification. Now I can understand better what's going on. And I can understand I'm not dumb. I'm not weak. I'm not an imbecile. They don't have the disease, and I do. Let's continue together. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane. What does altruistic means? It means giving with no expectation of a return. That's all it means. We're going to be referring back to this when we get to Bill's story tomorrow morning. We favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he then has a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. This is the first of 3 times that Dr. Silkworth is going to be telling me to put down the food. Now, proactively, because I know questions and answers, I've been doing this a long time. How do I put down the food? You put the food down by putting the food down. How do I do that? You put the food down. You know what you shouldn't be eating. Put it down and stop. I'm sorry, I wish I had another answer for you. I wish I could say, eat the vanilla ice cream instead of the chocolate and you'll be okay. I wish I could tell you that. I can't. I wish I could tell you, look, eat Big Macs instead of quarter pounders and you'll be okay. I can't tell you that. The food has to be down. If you're still drunk, there's nothing we can do for you. There's nothing we can do for you. This is the first of 3 times. How do I put the food down? You put it down by putting it down. The subject presented in this book, I'm at the top of XXVII, the doctor writes. The subject presented in this book seems to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultramodern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. What's he telling you here? He's telling you that as a doctor, he is a scientist. And as a scientist and a doctor, he knows what's wrong with you, and there's nothing he can do for you. Medical science has had a truck full of dreck dumped on their lawn. And we have said to the medical profession, help us, cure us, and they cannot. And he's telling you this in 1939. We are doctors. We know what's wrong with you. You need a spiritual awakening, which he calls moral psychology. There's nothing I can do for you. He's confessing his own powerlessness over you and I. We are powerless over food. He is the doctor. He is powerless over us. When I go to the cardiologist on Wednesday, the 28th, I bring OA literature with me. And the doctor thinks I'm wasting my time. He says, I see people coming in here. I beg them to lose weight. They're 340 pounds when they come in. 6 months later, they're over 400. 6 months later, they're over 500. 6 months later, they're dead. He says, we're not getting through to anybody. I keep telling them, all we need to get through is to one person. We get through to one person, it's well worth it. One person, that's all. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital. He's talking about Bill Wilson. And while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Oxford Group. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. They didn't want Bill Wilson talking to their patients. Bill is not a trained psychiatrist or psychologist or counselor or doctor. He's a layman. He's a drunk. And they were very afraid. And what they noticed was when he talked to these guys, they got a lot better results because he could reach them through identification where the doctors couldn't touch him. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power. Notice power is capitalized. He's talking about God, which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. So Bill Wilson got busy talking to alcoholics. Don't you dare tell me you're not going to sponsor. Don't you dare call me up and you want help and you're not going to sponsor. You're not going to give back. Don't you dare. Wherever you are, don't make me come down there. Don't make me turn this car around. It's your job to sponsor. You don't want to sponsor? That's too bad. You're not going to recover. You're afraid to sponsor? Too bad. You can't hurt them. If they want to recover, they'll recover. If they don't want to recover, you won't. We're not in the results business. We're not in the results business. Get busy and get going. Now, for the second time, Dr. Silkworth is going to tell me what? Let's find out. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological, spiritual measures can be of maximum benefit. What's he telling you there for the second time? He's telling you, put down the food. Put down the food. Put it down. How do you put down the food? You put it down by putting it down. Don't ask me how to stop eating Oreo cookies while you're eating them. Put them down and stop eating them. That's how you do it. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. There's that word. That the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed a habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Of course, they're astonishingly difficult to solve. All I can think about is eating and 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 eating. I can't solve my problems. All I'm thinking about is eating and not eating. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. What does that mean? Frothy means lacking substance. It's like the foam on a beer. It lacks substance. It doesn't work. I could bribe you. I could browbeat you. We've all had that. It doesn't work. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. What does that mean? It means only a compulsive overeater can reach a compulsive overeater, because it's not just information, it's also identification, one to the other. So we have to take sponsorship very seriously. You know, we always think about the newcomer, and that's great. We should do that. There are people in these rooms, there are people on this retreat right now that have been around here for years, and they're dying of their untreated food addiction, and we are hugging them to death. We've got to do a better job. I'm very excited about this because I feel that as an organization, I don't mean the organization, I mean those of us who comprise Overeaters Anonymous, we have failed many communities. We have failed the Black community tremendously. We have failed the Hispanic community tremendously. We have been very, very. We have not done a good job. when it comes to certain communities. We've got to do better. There are too many people dying. We have failed the Native American community. We have failed the Asian community. We have failed. Going by what I see in most conventions, the OA birthday or the Vision Convention or whatever, going by what I see, you would think that everybody who suffers from this disease is white, is whatever. And that's not the case. Most of the time I go to these retreats, I go to these conventions, you can count the people of color on one hand. I have spoken in Los Angeles and Boston and Chicago and New Jersey and places where there's huge minority populations. You could count the people of color on one hand, two hands, maybe three hands. So out of 1,200 people, there's nothing there. We've got to do better. We've got to do better. If any feel that a oh wait, I forgot something here. It must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel after many years of experience that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. What is he telling you here? Medicine is great, but the one breakthrough that has come about to treat alcoholism is Alcoholics Anonymous. One to the other, one to the other. Now, if this book was a building, this next paragraph would be the cornerstone. This next paragraph is so important, so vital, that without this paragraph, there is no program. There is no program. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Now, he named the physical allergy an allergy, the physical factor. Now that mental part is going to be called the effect. The mental twist is that part of our brain that drives us to the food in search of this effect. What is the effect? Let's find out. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, in other words, we know we're killing ourselves, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. Does that mean we think today is Saturday or we think today is Tuesday? No. What it means is we look at some Milk Duds and we think, well, maybe this time it'll be okay. Maybe this time it won't hurt me. Maybe this time I'll be able to eat Milk Duds in moderation. And of course I can't. What am I looking for? I'm looking for the effect. Why do I compulsively overeat? I don't set out to compulsively overeat. I set out to get the effect, that sense of ease and comfort that comes instantly by eating certain foods. I'm not eating those foods because they taste good. I'm eating those foods because they change the way I feel. And food does not do that for most people. I assumed it did because it does it for me. But Oreo cookies, French fries, tamales, whatever, it changes the way I feel. Let's continue. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks, drinks which they see others taking with impunity. What does impunity mean? It means they're not getting punished for it. My friends never had a diet. My friends never had horrible consequences from eating too much food. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, spiritual awakening, there is very little hope of his recovery. Now, stay with me here, because I'm going to talk about this paragraph. What this paragraph is telling us is that food was never the problem in the first place. Food was the solution to the problem. And if food is the solution to the problem, what is the problem? It's the buildup of emotions. That when I'm not eating, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. Throw in scared to death, jealous, comparing myself to other people, angry, judgmental, and those things don't feel very good. So my brain tells me, go eat some French fries, go eat some pizza. Notice my brain never says, go get some steamed broccoli. My brain never says, go get some cauliflower unless it's covered in cheese or it's fried. My brain never tells me those things. Isn't that weird? My brain tells me to eat pizza. My brain tells me to eat cookies or candy or fried crap, whatever it is. That's what my brain tells me to eat, because my brain is in search of relief from the untenable, unbearable, unrelenting pain of not eating. And not eating sucks, because when I'm not eating, I am restless, irritable, and discontent, and I am going to seek out this effect. Now, if all I had was the mental twist, I would carry M&Ms around in a medicine bottle. And when I got scared or I got whatever, or happy or jealous or whatever, or lustful, I'd pop an M&M in my mouth and I'd be fine. That's just half my problem. The other half is in the physical allergy, that once I eat an M&M, I'm going to want a second one and a 10th and an 80th and a 393rd. And so the physical allergy makes it impossible for me to stop eating M&Ms once I have started. My brain seeks out M&Ms to give it relief from the pain of not eating. I eat an M&M, I succumb to it, and the physical allergy takes over. Now, food was never the problem. Food was the solution to the problem all along. And you see, food not being the problem means that just not eating these foods will not solve the problem. I have to have a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. And the more I eat, the more I want. But if I don't eat any of them in the first place, then this terrible cycle cannot take place. And that's why I have to work the steps. And that's why I have to have a sponsor. And that's why I have to do the things I have to do. And that's what this is all about, Charlie Brown. This is about substituting the spiritual awakening for the effect that I get from an M&M, that I get the same thing from the spiritual awakening that I got from M&Ms, with none of the death-defying, horrible side effects. I never had a doctor say to me, you shouldn't do so many 10 steps. I never had a doctor say to me, you shouldn't go to so many meetings. I never had a doctor say to me, you shouldn't pray so much. But I have had doctors tell me, don't eat M&Ms anymore, you're dying. Don't eat Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore, you're dying. You're dying. You're circling the drain. Once a doctor said to me, you're circling the drain. You won't live another year. I'm 67 years old. That conversation was 37 years ago. I'm still here by the grace of God and the fellowship and the book called Alcoholics Anonymous. Food was never the problem. It was the solution to the problem. Let's continue. Page XXIX. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems, he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. And what are the rules? The rules are the steps. Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, "Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me." Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate, what does aggregate mean? It means total, of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. What's he telling you here again? For the second time, he is telling you that he knows what's wrong with you, with me, and there's nothing he can do. He is as powerless over us as we are over food. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. So he's breaking more ground here. I've had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal, which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. When he uses the word craving, it's not really, what they're doing is they're succumbing to the mental twist. Not in order for the physical allergy to take over, you must first have the liquor in you. And these guys were scared about the meeting, even though it was going to go their way. They were scared. The buildup of emotions. Once those emotions are built up, the brain is going to focus in on the sense of ease and comfort that comes instantly by drinking the liquor, eating the food. And so they drank because they couldn't take the pain of not drinking. And once they drank, they set off the allergy. Once they set off the allergy, they couldn't stop. And so everything blew up on them. And that's happened to us many, many thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Page XXX. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving, which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. Every one of us have buried people that made that supreme sacrifice. Every one of us misses desperately somebody in our lives that was addicted, that couldn't, wouldn't, didn't get into recovery. And that's very sad. Very, very sad. The classifications of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps, but they are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. A little later on tomorrow, we're going to find out that step 3 is a decision. A decision to do what? A decision to do 4 through 12 every day for the rest of your life. That's all step 3 is. If it takes you longer than 30 seconds to work step 3, you're doing it wrong. It's not a real involved thing. Step 3 is a decision. It says to turn your will and life over to God as you understand Him. How do you do that? By working the steps. You're not turning anything over to anybody in step 3. All you're doing is you're making a decision to do 4 through 12 every day for the rest of your life. That's all it is. Very quick step. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is a type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic depressive type who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then there are the types entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. Calls it a phenomenon because he doesn't understand it. He knows it's there, but he doesn't understand it. No one does. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. That's very true. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. Your disease is permanent, progressive, and fatal. You will always be a compulsive overeater if you are one. Your disease will get worse over time, whether you're eating or not, and this disease is fatal. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. That's the third time he's told you to put the food down. How do you put the food down? You put it down by putting it down. Is it going to suck? Yeah. Are you going to be nauseated? Yeah. You're going to go through withdrawal? Yeah. It's going to suck. New abstinence sucks, but just get through it and you'll never have to do it again. It sucks. I wish I could tell you it doesn't suck. I'd be lying. But on the other side is recovery, which doesn't suck. This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. What is the solution, top of XXXI? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. This is Hank Parkhurst. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life, was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger. And so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. Now we're going to talk about Fitz Mayo. These are some of the first guys in New York to get sober. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, spiritual awakening. And we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. William D. Silkworth, MD. Now, the depth at which you accept the doctor's opinion will mark the urgency that you will work the rest of the steps. You have a mind that focuses in on the food, not because you like the taste of it, Not because you're thrilled about anything about it, but what you know is that certain foods will change your perception of reality. They will change your brain. They will change the way you feel. And these foods are alluring to you because they become the solution to your problem. You have a physical allergy that means when you ingest these foods, you will not be able to control the amount you eat. That you have an allergy of the body, which makes it so that the more you eat, the more you want. The more you want, the more you eat, and it is just endless, endless. If you can't eat because of the allergy, and you can't keep from eating because of the twist of the mind, you are powerless over food. Your life's unmanageable. This is the essence of step one. Step one is the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, there is a solution, and more about alcoholism. Now, there's 10 minutes left. I'll take as many questions as I can in 10 minutes. I'll do the best I can. So I'm going to turn it back over to Clara or whomever. I guess Clara, although I'm not sure. But
Yeah,
I'll turn
Lupita
it
is
over.
moderating.
Who
Lupita's
is?
moderating. Lupita.
I'll turn it over to Lupita, and Lupita I'll turn it back over to you.
Ok. Si tienen preguntas en español, por favor, las hacen en el chat. If you have questions in English, please raise your hand. He only gonna answer questions for 10 minutes.
No food questions, please, and no, for the love of God, no math questions. But seriously, no food questions.
Okay, Fabiola, open your mic and ask your question. Fabiola, I think you are in the Spanish channel and we cannot hear you.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Harlem. I am Fabiola, and thank you for this conversation. My question would be: I've heard loud and clear that I have to put down the food, but it's difficult in that moment. What can I do when it gets so painful that I feel that there's no other way for me to
Make a call. Make a call. Tell us what you're thinking to yourself. Tell us. Lean into the fellowship. Use the tool of the phone. Reach out. Get somebody on the phone and say, I want to eat fried chicken. I want to eat candy. I want whatever it is you want to eat, and tell them why. And tell them that you don't know what else to do. Reach out. Take action. Don't just sit there and try to reason with yourself. Don't try to fight this urge on your own. Reach out to us. Lean into the fellowship. There's podcasts you can listen to. There's all kinds of meetings going on 24 hours a day. Take action.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We're all here for you. We've all been there. We're here. We're here for you.
Okay, I guess everything was very clear.
Si alguien tiene una pregunta, quiere el canal en español, lo puede traducir Mario a nuestro invitado.
Permíteme, ok, estás en el canal de español, porque ahorita estás en el canal de inglés, vete al canal de español.
Does someone have a question?
Only from Australia raised her hand.
Only,
Yeah.
and there are some in the chat.
Yeah, Mario's supposed to translate it. Okay.
Can I ask a question now?
Okay. Oli, can you open up your mic and ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Harlan. From your experience, as you've said, you put the food down at the beginning, you know, you just have to put the food down. How long was it for you when you got the relief to no longer want the food, where you were no longer holding your breath underwater or white knuckling? How long
It's a
did it take?
process, and it'll take as long as it takes. But the harder you work at the steps, moving through them quickly, the better off you're going to be. That's why I emphasize move through quickly. And that's why I hate when I see these people, they're just taking forever to work through the steps. How long can you hold your head underwater? Not long. After 2 days of abstinence, you're ready to begin the steps. There's no reason you can't do a chapter a day and be done with the steps in 7-8 days. This idea that the fourth step needs to take years or months or whatever is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I give my people 3 hours to finish the fourth step. If they can't finish it in 3 hours, there's a problem. You know the answer to every question. Who or what do you resent? Who or what do you fear? Who did you harm sexually? You know the answer to every one of those questions. There's nothing there that's a mystery. There's no reason you can't move through that in 2-3 hours. So this idea that the steps has to be this protracted months and months and months, it's ridiculous. You've got to work through so you can have a spiritual awakening. The faster you go through, the easier it's going to be. That's my opinion. After 2 days of abstinence, you can begin working the steps.
So in your experience, when did you have that spiritual experience? Do you remember when it happened for you?
Mine came very slowly, very slowly,
Okay.
very slowly. It comes quicker or slower depending on how hard you work at it.
Okay, thank you.
Work hard. You want it quicker? Work harder. Work faster. Work harder. It'll come quicker.
Thank
Get to meetings every day. Do what you need to do to give the message. You don't learn this by absorbing spiritual information. You learn this by transmitting spiritual information. You want quicker results? Work harder, work faster. It'll come.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have the last question. Ruben, go ahead. Open up your mic. Ruben, open up your mic. Your mic is closed. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Why not? Why not? Why can't you? There's a big difference between can't and won't.
Okay. What do you want to do, Harlan? It's like it's already the time. So
No, it's okay.
I don't know
We'll
you.
keep going. Well,
Oh,
I'll answer
okay.
this question. I think it's Rube or something. There's no such thing as can't. There's will and won't, but there's no such thing as can't. If you don't have a cell phone, get to a payphone. You don't have a payphone, do whatever you need to do to reach out to somebody and say to them, I want to eat cake. I want to eat whatever. There's no can't. There's will and won't, but there's no such thing as can't. With cell phones today, you can call into many time zones. I don't care what time of day it is, there is somebody that's going to answer that phone. There are numbers on A Vision for You that are in England and Ireland and Israel and God knows where. You have access to the whole world between WhatsApp and your cell phone, you have access to the whole world. So don't tell me that you can't. You will or won't, but there's no such thing as can't. Can't doesn't exist.
We having here another questions.
Okay, we'll take it. That's
Okay, I'm gonna change the channel. I'm gonna go to Spanish.
fine. Okay.
Harlan, ¿ves la diferencia entre la impotencia a la comida e ingobernabilidad cuando recaes? Ya no
No.
puedo ver la pregunta.
I don't understand the question.
¿Puedo decirle en español y me la traducen?
Adelante, hazla.
Hay gente que recae porque somos impotentes ante la comida e ingobernables.
No, they don't
Pero-
they don't relapse because they feel powerless. They relapse because they stop doing the work. They relapse because they're not doing 10, 11, and 12. They relapse because they're not reaching out. They don't relapse because they feel powerless. They may feel powerless, that's true. But if you keep doing your 10 steps and keep those emotions at bay, remember, the problem isn't the food, it's the buildup of emotions. If you keep doing the work, those emotions will not rise to the level of toxicity, and the brain will not see a need for the food, and it won't drive you into the arms of a bagel. So if you keep working the steps, you will never have to eat this way again, ever. You will never have to eat compulsively again. So relapse doesn't come because you feel powerless. Relapse comes when you don't do the work.
Gracias, suficiente. Hay negligencia.
What now? Hello? Okay, are there? Lupita, are you there?
Chicos, hay preguntas en el chat.
I'm sorry. Let's do one or two more. What's the next one?
I'll say, I read it in Spanish, so someone can translate it for you.
Okay.
It says, pregunta para Harlan, tu visión de la importancia que tiene sponsor para el programa, ¿por qué funciona de esta forma? ¿Por qué es el sponsor importante? Moni, ¿puedes traducirme, por
Because if you
favor?
don't sponsor, you can't transmit spiritual information. And if you don't sponsor, you're not going to recover. That means you're still exercising your self-will. You're telling God what you will and won't do. The program says you must sponsor. So there's no reason you're not sponsoring. You're just afraid you're not going to get the results that you want, or you're afraid. That's why we have step 10. Step 10 deals with the fear. But we are not in the results business. We don't get this program by absorbing spiritual information. We get this program by transmitting spiritual information. It will enhance your program. If you don't sponsor, you will not stay in recovery. It's that simple.
Thank you very much, Harlan. Okay, now we're gonna close the session right now. Thank you, everybody, for being here to this first part of our summer refresher workshop. And we want to remind you that tomorrow we're going to continue at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, which is 9 a.m. Mexico City time. I want to remind you that we are self-supported through our own voluntary contributions. In the chat, we already put the way to practice that 7 traditions, which allow us to continue passing the message of recovery to the compulsive eater that still suffers. We have many ways to send the contributions, and also in the chat of this group, we're gonna be publishing the different ways that you can do it according to your country. Now, I would like to ask Harlan to close the meeting with the Serenity Prayer.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we'll meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central Time. God bless every one of you.